Imagine building a factory that costs $350 million just to produce molecules measured in grams. And yet those very same molecules power drugs that generate tens of billions of dollars every single year. Drugs like Ozempic and wegovy, developed by Novo Nordisk, have created one of the biggest manufacturing shortages in modern pharmaceutical history. The reason? A tiny but extraordinarily valuable type of molecule called a peptide. Today, we're breaking down the real economics of building a peptide manufacturing plant using verified numbers from some of the world's largest producers. And from an investor's perspective, this might be one of the most capital-intensive and potentially most profitable bets in all of biotechnology. So what exactly are peptides? Think of them as short chains of amino acids, like small fragments of proteins. They're precisely engineered to trigger specific biological responses inside the body. They're not just for anything. They're used to treat some of the most important diseases of our time: type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, hormonal disorders, and rare diseases. Ozempic and wegovy, two of the best-selling drugs in the world, are peptide-based medicines. They belong to a class called GLP-1 receptor agonists, which work by regulating blood sugar and appetite. The massive commercial success of these drugs has ignited a global race to build peptide production capacity. And that race is incredibly expensive. To really understand the economics, let's look at the world's benchmark company for peptide manufacturing, Bachem Holding AG. This Swiss company, founded way back in 1971, is one of the largest dedicated peptide manufacturers on the planet. They supply the active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, to drug companies all over the globe. Let's look at their verified 2024 full-year results, which were reported in February 2025. Their revenue hit 605.3 million Swiss francs, up almost 5% from the previous year. Their EBITDA, a key measure of profitability, was 176.3 million, up over 5.7%. This gives them an EBITDA margin of 29.1%. Now, for a manufacturing business, not a software company, a nearly 30% operating margin is extraordinary. Their net income was 120.3 million, a jump of 7.5%. And Bachem isn't stopping there. They're now targeting 1 billion Swiss francs in annual revenue by 2026, which will require a massive expansion of their production capacity. So how do they maintain these incredible margins and keep competitors out? It comes down to three huge structural advantages. First, the technology is genuinely hard. Most peptides are produced using a method called solid-phase peptide synthesis. This means building the molecule one amino acid at a time inside specialized chemical reactors. Each step requires precise control, purification, and quality testing. It's not something you can just replicate cheaply or quickly. Second, the regulatory barriers are massive. Every single facility must comply with something called Good Manufacturing Practice, or GMP. That means every process, every batch, and every piece of equipment must pass strict inspections by agencies like the FDA in the US and the EMA in Europe. A single failed inspection can shut down an entire plant for months. And third, the switching costs are enormous. Once a pharmaceutical company qualifies a manufacturing partner, switching to a new one is a nightmare. It requires revalidation, new regulatory filings, and can take years of process transfer work. This creates a powerful lock-in effect, meaning contracts often run for many years, creating durable, predictable revenue streams for the manufacturer. Now for the number that really matters to investors. How much does it actually cost to build one of these facilities? The honest answer is far more than most people expect. For a mid-scale facility that aims to produce roughly 50 kilograms per year of a GLP-1 active ingredient, you should expect a total capital expenditure in the range of $220 million to $500 million. This depends on the location, the scale, and whether you're building from scratch or converting an existing site. So where does all that money go? About 28% goes to civil construction and building out the specialized clean rooms. 22% is for the synthesis equipment itself, things like chemical reactors and synthesis systems. Another 18% is for purification and lyophilization systems, which are basically giant freeze dryers. 12% is for utilities like specialized HVAC, water for injection systems, and clean steam. 8% goes to quality control labs and analytical instruments. And the final 12% is for engineering, validation, and a contingency reserve for when things inevitably go wrong. Here's a critical note for investors. Those lyophilizers, the freeze-drying systems used to stabilize the finished peptides, have equipment lead times of 18 to 24 months. If you order ones that are too small, they will become the bottleneck for your entire production line right after you launch. Building the plant is only the first challenge. Here's a realistic timeline for an investor, based on real construction schedules. In years 0 to 1, you have site selection, engineering design, and permitting. You should budget 12 to 18 months just for the regulatory pre-work. From years 1 to 3, you have the actual construction and cleanroom build-out. During years 2 to 4, you're procuring and installing the equipment. Remember to order those lyophilizers early because their lead times are brutal. From years 3 to 5, you have commissioning, GMP qualification, and the pre-approval inspections from the FDA and EMA. Finally, in year 5 or later, you ship your first commercial batches. Revenue starts to ramp up slowly as your customers complete their own qualification audits. To give you a real-world example, Pharma broke ground on a new facility in early 2025 and is targeting commercial operations in the first half of 2028. That's a 3-year build cycle, and that's considered optimistic. Eli Lilly's new mega site in Huntsville won't be operational until 2032. The bottom line for any investor is this: you are committing hundreds of millions of dollars with zero revenue for 4 to 6 years. This is not a short-term trade. This is a decade-long capital allocation decision. Once the plant is up and running, a mid-scale facility carries annual operating costs of $30 to $50 million or more. The biggest expenses are raw materials like amino acid building blocks and solvents, making up 40 to 50% of your operating expenses. Highly skilled labor, including chemists, engineers, and quality control specialists, accounts for about 20%. Utilities, solvents, and purification chemicals are another 15%. And hazardous waste treatment, quality control, and regulatory compliance make up the rest. The amino acid supply chain deserves special attention. The protected amino acid building blocks you need can cost anywhere from $3 to $50 per kilogram, and the supply is heavily concentrated in China. This means that U.S. tariff exposure is a real and growing risk. In fact, several contract manufacturers are already moving their amino acid procurement to other countries for this very reason. Despite all these costs, the revenue potential is substantial. Contract manufacturing pricing for GLP-1 class peptides currently runs from $800 to $2,500 per gram, depending on the volume, complexity, and the customer. At full production scale, a mid-sized facility can generate $60 to $100 million in annual revenue. And as we saw with Bachem, which operates at a large commercial scale, the mature economics are fantastic. $605 million in revenue, a 29.1% EBITDA margin, and a clear path to $1 billion by 2026. For a capital-intensive manufacturing business, those numbers are truly exceptional, and they're verified directly from Bachem's published annual results. The GLP-1 wave is real, and it is large. Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly together generate over $30 billion annually from their peptide-based obesity and diabetes medicines, and both companies are constrained by their manufacturing capacity. But the demand story goes well beyond just GLP-1 South. The broader peptide drug pipeline includes oncology payloads, treatments for rare diseases, and next-generation hormonal therapies. Eli Lilly's AI-driven manufacturing platform called LilyPad uses over 1,000 NVIDIA Blackwell Ultra GPUs and can simulate billions of molecular candidates every year. This is accelerating the discovery of new peptide drugs that will all need commercial-scale manufacturing in the future. The capacity shortage is structural, and because it takes 5 to 6 years to build new capacity, the companies that move first have a durable window of pricing power. Let's be honest and look at both sides of the coin. The bull case is strong. You have near impenetrable barriers to entry from technology, regulation, and switching costs. The long-term contracts create predictable, durable revenue. Demand is driven by global disease trends, not consumer fads. And as we've seen, mature players demonstrate that margins over 29% are achievable. Plus, government incentives, like the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act manufacturing credit or South Korean industrial grants, can reduce the effective capital expenditure by 5 to 15%. But there are key risks. GLP-1 South could become commoditized. The entry of biosimilars and the development of oral small molecule alternatives could compress peptide contract pricing by 30 to 50% by the year 2030. Construction overruns are common, with pharmaceutical facility builds historically running 20 to 40% over budget. And any delays in GMP validation mean delays in revenue and increased carrying costs. Finally, that amino acid supply chain concentration in China means tariff exposure is a real and growing threat. So, what's the base case for investor returns? A well-executed mid-scale U.S. facility targeting GLP-1 contracts should generate a 14 to 18% internal rate of return with a 9 to 12-year payback period. Siting the facility in the Asia-Pacific region can improve those returns materially, but at the cost of increased IP risk and regulatory complexity. Peptide manufacturing isn't the most visible corner of the pharmaceutical industry, but it is where the molecules that run some of the world's most valuable drugs are actually made. Building the infrastructure is expensive, slow, and technically unforgiving. But for investors willing to commit to the long timeline, the structural barriers and margin profile are among the most attractive in all of manufacturing. The companies building these factories today, like Bachem Corden Pharma and SK Pharmteco, are quietly positioning themselves at the foundation of the next decade of pharmaceutical growth. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe for more deep dives into the business side of biotechnology and pharmaceuticals. Thanks for watching.